The scream tore through the house before anyone could even process what was happening. That money was for her loans. His father's voice was sharp, raw, and unyielding. Evan froze, standing in the living room with a set of keys in his hand, the words hitting him harder than any blow could. He had always known that money could be a source of tension in their family. But he had never imagined his own father screaming at him, accusing him of theft. The weight of betrayal settled immediately on his chest, leaving him momentarily breathless, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on him. For years, Evan had been the quiet, dependable son. He had sacrificed more than anyone noticed. Wow. His sister was always praised for her achievements. Evan had worked late nights, taken extra jobs, and quietly contributed to every family need without complaint. He had been careful with his own money, saving, budgeting, making sure he could support himself. But he had also sent funds whenever the family claimed there was an emergency. Whenever his sister's tuition needed help, whenever bills piled up and they claimed they had no choice, Evan had trusted his parents to use that money wisely. It was only now that he learned the truth. The money he had sent, every hard-earned penny, had not gone where he thought. It wasn't helping with loans, it wasn't paying debts. Was quietly redirected into his father's account to secure his sister's future. His sacrifices had been ignored. His efforts had been unseen. And for the first time, Evan realized just how deliberately his father had used him as a tool, not a son. The thought burned like fire, rage mixed with hurt. He had been loyal, responsible, careful, and in return he had been deceived. Evan's father didn't even pause for argument. There was no moment of hesitation, no attempt to explain, only the assumption that Evan would accept this judgment without question. For her loans, his father said again, calm and firm, as if that simple explanation justified years of betrayal. There was no acknowledgement of Evan's sacrifices, no recognition of his hard work, no hint of gratitude for all the times he had stepped up when the family needed him. It was a moment of pure revelation. Evan existed only as a source of funds, a silent provider, a dependable tool whose loyalty could be exploited without remorse. In that instant, something inside Evan shifted. He felt a hard edge form in his chest, a cold clarity that settled quickly and completely. He didn't argue, didn't scream back, he didn't try to reason. Instead, he nodded quietly, letting the anger simmer beneath a calm exterior. He realized, then, that words would not fix this. Pleading would not restore justice. The only thing left was action, and he would act in a way that his father could not anticipate. Evan thought about his sister for a moment, the one who had always been the favored child, the one for whom sacrifices had been made repeatedly without question. He didn't feel hatred for her. She had lived her life unaware, protected by circumstance. No, the anger was reserved for the one who had manipulated the family for his own benefit, his father. The sense of betrayal was so deep it hurt in a way that no simple argument could fix. Every memory of trust, every moment he had believed he was contributing to a fair family system, now felt tainted. And then he thought about his brother Liam, the overlooked middle child who had drifted from rental to rental, working tirelessly without anyone noticing. Liam had been patient, kind, and overlooked. The kind of person who would give everything he had without complaint, never asking for help, never demanding recognition. Evan realized Liam deserved better. He deserved acknowledgement. He deserved security that had never been offered to him. And suddenly, Evan knew what he had to do. The anger that had risen in him now had a purpose. The money from his grandmother's inheritance had arrived quietly. Bypassing everyone, she had left it. To Evan specifically, a final act of trust, a vote of confidence in the son who had been consistently responsible. It was money his father could not control, could not redirect, could not manipulate. He could have used it for himself, for his sister, for whatever plan his father assumed would continue the family hierarchy. But Evan saw an opportunity. Opportunity to turn betrayal into justice. He didn't rush. He didn't act on impulse. The decision had weight, consequences, and significance. He considered the house he could buy, the stability he could provide, the difference it could make for Liam. He envisioned the relief on his brother's face. The moment Liam realized that someone truly saw him, someone had chosen him when no one else had, the thought gave Evan a strange sense of calm, as though every betrayal he had endured was finally transforming into something positive. Evan's plan was not to humiliate his father with cruelty, but to show him that loyalty could not be bought. That manipulation could not control the future. By choosing Liam, Evan sent a clear message without speaking a word. He was reclaiming agency over his life and the lives of those he cared about. It was quiet revenge, one that didn't destroy, but redirected the power balance carefully, deliberately, and without unnecessary malice. As he finalized the property deal, Evan felt the tension in his chest ease slightly, replaced by a steely determination. This was not about money. It was not about material possessions. It was about fairness, recognition, and the subtle satisfaction of reclaiming control over a life that had been manipulated for far too long. He imagined telling his father nothing, letting him discover the truth on his own. The eventual realization would sting, but it would not be cruel. It would simply exist, the undeniable outcome of Evan's careful decision. He held the keys in his hand and considered the weight of the inheritance once more. It had been intended to secure his future, to acknowledge his diligence, but he chose instead to extend its power to someone equally deserving. Liam would benefit, yes, but so would Evan. In ways his father could never understand. He would feel dignity restored, autonomy regained, and the quiet triumph of setting things right on his own terms. The day he handed the keys to Liam, he watched. His brother's eyes widened with disbelief. There were no words, only the stunned silence of someone realizing for the first time that someone truly cared. It was in that moment that Evan understood the power of quiet revenge, the kind that heals some wounds while exposing the truth to those who need it. His father's scream echoed faintly in his memory, but it was now part of the past. A spark that had ignited a decisive action. Evan's journey was just beginning. But this first step, this deliberate act of retribution disguised as generosity, had already shifted everything. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was effective. It was justice in its simplest, most human form, giving to those who deserved it and refusing to remain a pawn in someone else's game. And as he watched Liam explore the home, laughter quietly filling the empty rooms, Evan felt a strange sense of peace. The betrayal had not broken him. It had guided him toward a choice that redefined his family, his loyalty, and himself. By the end of that day, the anger he had felt toward his father had transformed. It was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it had a purpose now. It no longer consumed him. It fueled him, guided him, and reminded him that control over one's life and choices could never be taken away. He realized that revenge wasn't about inflicting pain, it was about reclaiming it, redirecting it, and ensuring that justice, however quiet, was finally served. Evan couldn't sleep that night. The house was quiet, but his mind raced. The decision to buy Liam a home had been deliberate, but the repercussions were just beginning to surface. Every choice carried weight. Every action had consequences, and he felt them pressing against his chest. His father's voice still echoed in his mind, a constant reminder that the world he knew had shifted. That money was for her loans. Those words replayed like a loop, each repetition sharpening his determination. He had acted, yes, but the real struggle was only starting. He thought about his father carefully, analyzing every memory, every interaction, every subtle manipulation. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a pattern. Evan realized he had spent years trying to please someone who measured love in utility. Every gesture of loyalty had been a transaction. Every sacrifice had been accounted for, redirected, repurposed. The anger was still there, but now it mixed with something more potent: clarity. He understood the rules of the game and he refused to play by them any longer. Then there was Liam. Evan thought about his brother constantly. Liam had always been quiet, overlooked, the one who never demanded attention, the one who bore the weight of responsibility silently. While Evan had sacrificed for the family, Liam had simply existed in the shadows, doing what he needed to survive, never complaining, never asking. Watching him finally unlock the door to his own home had been a revelation. The gratitude, the disbelief, the quiet tears in his eyes, it was almost too much to bear. Evan realized that his act of revenge was not just about punishing his father. It was about lifting someone else, someone deserving, into the life they had earned, but never received. Yet the act itself did not ease the tension completely. There was a lingering doubt that gnawed at him. Was he helping Liam, or was he using Liam to hurt his father? Revenge, he knew, could be a double-edged sword. Every good intention could be twisted into justification. Every act of kindness could carry a hidden sting. Evan wrestled with this realization, pacing through the house at odd hours, replaying scenarios, considering outcomes. He knew his father would never admit wrongdoing. He knew his father would frame the narrative to make Evan the villain. And he knew that no amount of reasoning could fix what had been broken over the years. The first sign of resistance came quickly. His father called, his tone calm but threaded with urgency and accusation. "You need to undo this," he said. "Sell the house, transfer the money, fix this mistake." Evan listened, silent, letting the words wash over him. There was no shouting, no drama, just the cold, measured voice of someone who truly believed. He was entitled. Each sentence reinforced the knowledge Evan had been gathering for years. His father had no capacity to see past his own perspective. There was no negotiation, only command. Evan's internal conflict intensified. Part of him wanted to avoid confrontation, to smooth over the rift, to restore some semblance of peace. That part imagined returning the money, apologizing, pretending nothing had happened. It imagined a quiet life, avoiding conflict, keeping the family whole in appearance, even if not in reality. But another part, stronger and sharper, resisted. That part remembered the years of manipulation, the quiet exploitation, the way his father had screamed not in worry, but in anger at losing control. That part refused to back down, refused to allow the cycle of betrayal to continue. Planning the next steps became an obsession. Evan spent hours researching, evaluating property details, calculating finances, and considering legal ramifications. Every detail mattered because this was not just about money. It was about asserting control over a system that had always tried to control him. Each decision was measured, deliberate, precise. There was no room for error. This was quiet revenge, careful and calculated, not impulsive or destructive. He also spent time observing his father, noting habits, behaviors, patterns. Evan understood that understanding the antagonist was as important as acting. His father's confidence, his sense of entitlement, its assumption that the family could be managed like a ledger. All of it provided insight. Evan realized that revenge didn't need to be loud or aggressive. It could be subtle. It could be a single act executed flawlessly that shifted the balance without confrontation. Meanwhile, Liam's reaction continued to occupy his thoughts. The quiet gratitude, the astonishment, the way he hesitated before realizing the gift was truly his. It was powerful. Evan saw it as validation, proof that his choices were not solely motivated by anger, but by a desire to restore fairness. It reminded him that revenge could take many forms. And sometimes the most satisfying form was one that built rather than destroyed. But even as he celebrated this small victory, Evan remained cautious. His father's reaction was unpredictable, and every interaction carried risk. Sleep was rare. Evan's mind raced through conversations, imagined confrontations, and hypothetical scenarios. He considered the legal implications, the possible objections, and even the emotional backlash from other family members. Each thought was sharp, each decision a test of his resolve. He knew the moment of truth was approaching, the inevitable confrontation with his father, where choices would have to be final, consequences immediate. Yet he also understood that patience was his ally. Timing mattered. Precision mattered. This was not impulsive retaliation. This was strategic assertion. Evan's reflections often turned inward. He questioned his own morality, wondering if helping Liam while deliberately defying his father was justified. Could he reconcile the satisfaction of giving with the sting of disobedience? Could he feel proud without guilt? These questions did not have easy answers, and the uncertainty added tension to every decision. He realized revenge was as much about psychological mastery as it was about material action. The mind had to be controlled, the emotions tempered, the impulses directed. The psychological weight was immense. Each day, Evan felt the pressure of choice, the responsibility of acting ethically while pursuing his personal sense of justice. He reviewed every transaction, every conversation, every possible fallout. The house he purchased for Liam was modest but ideal, secure, practical, and debt-free. It was a gesture of empowerment, not indulgence. In giving Liam stability, Evan provided himself the satisfaction of reclaiming agency. He had transformed the power dynamic quietly but unmistakably. Even as he planned, Evan recognized the human elements at play. Liam was unaware of the full extent of the manipulation that had occurred. He would only see the gift, not the context. Evan's father, meanwhile, would perceive only defiance and disobedience. The subtlety of this revenge was intentional. It didn't need to humiliate. It didn't need to shame. It needed only to assert a new reality, one in which Evan's choices mattered and his integrity was intact. By the end of part 2, Evan had come to a critical understanding. Revenge could be quiet, careful, and morally complex. It wasn't about inflicting maximum pain. It was about reclaiming control and restoring justice in a way that aligned with personal values. He felt the tension in his chest ease slightly, replaced with a clear sense of purpose. The internal struggle remained, but it had direction. He was no longer a passive participant in a family shaped by manipulation. He was an active agent, creating outcomes deliberately. The day approached when confrontation would be unavoidable. Evan could anticipate his father's fury, the accusations, the demands for correction. But he also knew that the careful groundwork he had laid, the choice of property, the timing, the method of delivery, ensured that he held the advantage. His father might shout, plead, or threaten, but the reality was set. Evan's actions could not be undone without moral compromise. And through it all, Liam thrived quietly, oblivious to the full story but secure in the life Evan had gifted him. That quiet success, that unassuming gratitude, was both a reward and a shield. It reminded Evan why he acted, why patience and planning mattered, why revenge could be more effective when it built rather than destroyed. He had taken betrayal, channeled it, and created something tangible, beneficial, and lasting. The day of reckoning arrived without warning. Evan heard the knock on his door late in the afternoon. It was firm, deliberate, the kind that demanded attention. He opened it to find his father standing there, face tight with controlled anger. There was no shouting yet, only the weight of expectation, the quiet force of someone who truly believed he could dictate reality. "We need to talk," his father said. The words were calm but carried the tension of a storm. Evan nodded slightly, letting him in, aware that this was the moment all his planning and patience would be tested. Inside the house, every detail seemed amplified. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of neighbors, the subtle creak of the floorboards all became part of the tension, pressing against him like a physical weight. His father's gaze swept the room, lingering on things as if trying to assert dominance to find evidence that Evan had overstepped, but Evan had prepared meticulously. Every paper, every account, every legal detail was in order. There was no room for attack. The power balance had shifted, subtly, but unmistakably. "You could still fix this," his father began, his tone measured. "Sell the house, transfer the money, correct your mistake." The words were precise, calculated, almost rehearsed. Evan listened without interrupting. He felt the familiar surge of old emotions, anger, betrayal, disbelief, but they were tempered now by the clarity of purpose. He understood his father's tactics. He knew that compliance would bring only temporary peace, that submission would reinforce a lifetime of manipulation. Evan looked at his father calmly. There was no fear, no hesitation, only focus. In his mind, he reviewed every step that had led him here: the inheritance, the careful selection of the property, the moment Liam had unlocked the door to his new home. Each memory reinforced the decision he had already made. This was not revenge in the traditional sense. It was justice, quiet and deliberate, built not on cruelty but on fairness. The tension in the room thickened. His father's hands flexed, slightly at his sides, a subtle sign of frustration. His eyes darted, searching for a crack, a weakness. Evan held his gaze steadily. He felt the weight of every past betrayal, every unnoticed sacrifice, every moment of being used and ignored. And yet, he did not feel rage in the usual sense. He felt control. He felt authority over his own life, his own choices, and his own moral compass. That realization was empowering. His father continued, shifting tactics subtly. "Do you understand what you're doing? This isn't just a gift. This is defiance. You're humiliating me. You're disrespecting the family." The words were designed to provoke, to make Evan second-guess himself, to push him toward regret. Evan, however, had anticipated this. He remained composed, letting the accusations pass through him without reaction. Every breath was measured. Every heartbeat was steady. The preparation of months, the careful planning, had prepared him for this confrontation. Evan's mind raced with possibilities, weighing each response, considering every outcome. He could comply, return the house, restore the status quo, at the cost of his own dignity, autonomy, and sense of justice. Or he could stand firm, accept the inevitable fallout, and let the consequences unfold naturally. The choice was clear, but the weight of it pressed against him like a physical presence. This was the climax of the struggle. It's the moment where internal conflict collided with external reality. He finally spoke, his voice calm, steady, deliberate. "I already did the right thing," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It was neither boastful nor aggressive. It was declarative, final. Evan felt a sense of release with those words, as if a pressure valve had been opened and the tension that had accumulated for years began to ease. He was not asking for approval. He was not seeking forgiveness. He was asserting his choice, and it was absolute. The reaction was immediate. His father's face fell, the controlled anger giving way to a stunned silence. For a brief moment, he appeared unmoored, unprepared for resistance, unprepared for a choice that refused compliance. Evan observed the subtle shift, the tightening of the jaw, the narrowing of the eyes, the realization that control had slipped through his fingers. It was not triumph in the traditional sense, but a quiet validation. The power had shifted. The manipulation could no longer dominate the outcome. Evan felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. He had achieved the goal he set for himself, but he knew there would be consequences. Family dynamics would change permanently. Relationships that had seemed stable were now fractured. Invitations, conversations, and interactions would never be the same. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt agency. He had acted deliberately, ethically within his own framework, and had asserted control over his life without sacrificing his moral standards. Liam remained, blissfully unaware of the confrontation, but his happiness provided Evan with a silent affirmation. Watching his brother thrive in the house, free from rent, free from insecurity, was an emotional payoff greater than any confrontation could provide. Evan realized that revenge had taken an unconventional form. It was not about hurting his father, but about uplifting someone who had long been ignored. The satisfaction came not from retaliation, but from justice. Subtle and deliberate. As the conversation with his father ended, Evan felt the full weight of what had transpired. There was no handshake, no apology, no reconciliation, only the quiet recognition that boundaries had shifted irrevocably. His father left the house, the tension lingering in the air like a shadow. Evan did not feel triumph or malice, only clarity. The confrontation had served its purpose. The stakes had been high, the moral challenges significant. But the outcome was aligned with his values. In the days that followed, Evan reflected on the experience. The act of standing firm, the courage to assert his choice, and the deliberate planning of the house purchase all coalesced into a profound lesson. Revenge, he realized, was not about immediate satisfaction or dramatic gestures. It was about careful calculation, ethical considerations, and the willingness to accept consequences. It was about reclaiming agency, redefining relationships, and establishing personal integrity in the face of betrayal. The psychological relief was palpable. Evan no longer carried the suffocating weight of exploitation. He no longer feared his father's control over his life. The act of deliberate, quiet justice had restored a sense of balance. He understood that the cost of revenge was inevitable. Fractured relationships, lingering resentment, permanent shifts in family dynamics, but it was a cost he was willing to bear. The clarity, control, and moral alignment were worth it. Evan also recognized a subtle transformation within himself. The process of planning, anticipating, and executing this unconventional revenge had strengthened his confidence, honed his judgment, and deepened his understanding of human behavior. He had learned to navigate complex emotional landscapes, balancing anger, ethics, and action. The confrontation was not simply about money or property. It was about asserting identity, reclaiming autonomy, and exercising moral agency in a family that had long denied it. By the end of Part 3, Evan had achieved resolution in the moment of confrontation. He had faced the critical decision, measured every option, and acted according to a deliberate moral framework. The climax was not marked by shouting, destruction, or dramatic fallout, but by the quiet, undeniable assertion of choice. The house for Liam stood as a symbol, the confrontation with his father as a lesson, and Evan's sense of integrity as the ultimate reward. The story moved beyond revenge as a concept of retaliation. It became a story about justice, empowerment, and the human capacity to reclaim agency. Evan's careful actions demonstrated that moral clarity and deliberate decision-making could achieve outcomes far more satisfying than traditional vengeance. By refusing to comply with manipulation, yet choosing a path that benefited someone deserving, he redefined the narrative of betrayal, control, and retribution within his family. And as the days passed, Evan understood fully that revenge, when executed with clarity, purpose, and ethics, need not destroy. It could transform. It could elevate. It could restore balance without unnecessary cruelty. The confrontation had ended, the choice had been made, and the consequences, while permanent, were accepted. The act of quiet justice had reshaped his family, reaffirmed his values, and given him a sense of peace he had never known before.